All right, back into it here. So, we're still in chapter 5. Which truck should I choose? And right now we're talking about the deletes, right? So now, of course, some guys do what's called a delete. And technically, this is illegal. So, essentially, with a delete, somebody with the right type of delete, I would say, will have the best of both worlds because they will have a newer truck and better fuel mileage that runs with the dependability of a pre-emissions motor. Like I said, technically, this is illegal, especially in states like California, where the California Air Research Board, which is CARB, got started. They will post up at random spots and weigh stations like the Banning scales on I-10, and they do their emission checks. Every now and then, someone will get busted and has to pay a fine of somewhere from a couple of $100 to a couple of $10,000. Yeah, seen some as high as like the upper 10,000s. Yeah. So the people who do deletes are usually really well at blending in and don't talk about it much. The people that usually get in trouble over are the ones that like to go around and tell everybody that they've deleted their truck and hey, I got to delete a truck and delete a truck and delete a truck and do all that, right? So, that's a great way to get to draw attention. So again, this would be illegal, but I just want to go ahead and get this into conversation because this is a topic that pretty much all of us will get approached with eventually, and from my experience in different ways or another, I've seen some really great delete programs, but really I've seen way more worse delete programs that ended up like busting turbos and cracking heads and head gaskets and doing weird things with the valves. And a lot of the jobs are just kind of like hack style jobs where the sensors are just cut off but the injectors aren't remapped. And so there's programs out there, I'll just put it like that, like a milk money too. But yeah, and especially when you have VGT turbos and you go into taking those off for standard turbos, it's just something to be aware of. So I'm just getting the conversation started a little early here, and also just talking about some of the repercussions and some of the benefits, because I've seen some of these delete programs run so well that even after 7,000 miles of driving, the oil is still yellow. It's pretty wild. How clean the motor can run, therefore allowing the motor to last longer. Of course, no emission issues, no EGR coolers, no EGR valves, no DPF, no DOC, none of that to stop and slow up. Then when it's tuned right, it really runs better and it produces less soot. And I'm drinking out of my own coffee mugs here. These are on the website, andrewsmethod.com. Proud American trucking entrepreneurs. Why not? All right. Sometimes I got to get myself in the mood to do these videos, but I know it all add up and it's essential. I was joking with my brother-in-law earlier. I was like, why did I write so much? But it's all good. We're going to keep on getting through it here. So back onto these deletes. So right here I say, again, it would be technically illegal for me to suggest to delete the emission system, but I will say many people do go this route for a solution to their emission nightmares with all the dollar signs. Two things to take into consideration when it comes to deletes are that if a dealership finds out by hooking their computer up to your truck that you have a deleted truck, some dealerships will really stick by the certain shop code or rules or whatever, and where they might claim that they're not allowed to release your truck until it's converted back to stock, which could be as much as $6,000 just in DPF and DOC filters alone if they've been customized. Some shops actually try to enforce this. So But that was actually one of well, it can be good. The silver lining to this is it's incentive not to go to the dealerships as much. The dealerships. I don't know. I just over the years, a lot of us just feel like through our experience that the dealerships are just not the right place to be for a solo owner operator. So this is already starting that type of tactic anyways, to move down to the more local and regional shops where the foremans, and you can make deals and build rapport and relationships and get knowledge and ask questions, maybe even borrow tools. Like, that's how we really make it here. We do our best to like share our time and some of the money that we make with our team that we build, and we just keep it real. So some shops will try to enforce this, so be aware of that. Be mindful and do what you can, if you go this route, not to let people hook up to your computer, or make sure you tell them you do not want the update, because as long as they're not going to go do an update, they won't know. But if they automatically like update, like, hey, we got a new campaign for your truck or whatever, and we updated it, it's like, oh you know what I mean? Because if they updated it already, then it's going to automatically start putting on what check engine lights for DPF filter, DOC filter, and they're gonna be like, man, you got problems. And yeah, we go like, well, just take it back to my old program. They're like, we can't, it's gone now. And they're like, why? What do you have, a delete or something? And it's like, so that's something always to be mindful of. If you have to be in a dealership, or even when you're scouting out smaller shops, you might go ahead and let them know before you get in there. I don't know. It's better to kind of just pull up and talk to them, because you could be anybody, and they might say yes, but then they might tell you no over the phone, because they don't know if you're just like, doing some investigation type stuff. So and here's this second thing to be aware of when it comes to deletes, is to make sure to get the right program. If you get one of these butchered, negative, barely done deletes with crazy jacked up horsepower and stuff, you can really do some damage to your motor or blow a turbo quick. So, and I just say here for the record, I will say that deletes are not allowed in the USA, and getting caught with a delete can result in a hefty fine, but usually it's like around $10,000 or less, sometimes more. Even by them hooking up to your their computer up to your truck, and if a tech automatically starts updating your ECM, like we just mentioned, software, you'll lose your delete file, and now you're stuck in a sticky situation of trying to keep it cool that you don't have a delete, and have someone reprogram your ECM at their shop, which could be a pretty great challenge to convince them to allow somebody else to come put a program in their shop. Maybe you can get them to pull it out the bay, but even then on the parking lot, it's just weird at that point. But you got to do what you got to do, or you just end up paying them the $6,000 to put these filters back on. All right, so it's all right here to read as well. There are some exceptions of people doing great with newer motors. Some guys even custom tune them for even more fuel efficiency. But unfortunately, they are the exception, and in my experience, not the majority. Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't want those problems for myself or anybody else. Just for the increased fuel mileage and some newer paint and some newer seats. Yeah, it looks cool, but like the problems that come with owning these trucks are just really wouldn't want those problems on really anybody. It's just such a horse and carrot race. Like, I want the carrot eventually, not just always looking at the carrot. They say right around 2000, more so 2018, right around when we get into the X15 series Cummins, that they've got a lot better as far as managing the after treatment system. Because I did see when they put the Cummins X15 out in Dallas about 3 years ago at the truck show, and they were showing me how they really improved the size of the DPF can, which probably also means it costs more. It's probably more. I don't know, now it's probably a $5,000 filter. I don't know, but maybe not, since they're making so many of them now. But the larger size after treatment, the filters down there, and the increased size, and the mixing pipes and stuff, and I was like, okay. Because the motor previous to the X15, which is the 2350 and the 2250 ISX, man, those turbos really got a bad rep. Well, actually, not the turbo. The turbos too were hard to balance, but the fuel pumps, and we'll talk about that here when as we get into the motors. So, but I can't really report on that in too much detail. Cummins has put out the X15 series, and it has a way bigger DPF and DOC for increased service intervals. The computer engineering has gotten better as well, so it seems. But at this point, we're basically talking about buying a brand new truck, and at that point, me personally, I don't want all those bills. Depending on where you are in this journey, you may want to have those bills, and if so, if you want a brand new truck, I would go for this X15 Cummins Efficiency series. Out of all the newer motors, they seem to have the best cut for the buck. So at this point, I've already paid off a $65,000 truck the first time around. That I finished that when I was about 27, late 26, 27. And I just I value my time, my family, friends, and just having different options of businesses where I don't always have to be gone for 2, 3, 4 weeks and all that stuff, and just doing what we do on the road. I've put my 10 years in, 11, 12 years, and I still enjoy to go out, but it's all good. We grow. I got some businesses, that I'm interested in and I want to do. I want to just, I've been using trucking to assist me in having the momentum to pursue those, right? So, I just value that more so than, for me at this point, a shiny new truck. And hey, shoot, I still keep my truck shiny for sure. But I say here, better believe it, the newer the truck, the harder it will be on it to work on it yourself. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because that's another thing too. Why I don't pursue the newer trucks per se is just because they're stacked up with so many layers. Like, you got your motor externals, then you got your next layer of like emissions, then you got the new layer of emissions, and it's just so deep to do something simple like an outside oil pump or something on one of the original motors. And the more you will probably need to own specialized tools, in most cases you will, to some extent, even if it's just software to be able to plug into it to read the fault codes. Because still on my 2000 Volvo, the diagnostic screen allows me to check ABS all the way down to wheel position, not just the ABS light. I can check it down to which wheel position and what's the code numerical and with text. Same thing with any type of engine code. And I can run diagnostics on my gauges. I can run diagnostics on different parts of that's receiving electrical, and then I even got part numbers. I can access part numbers on there. So I remember in my 2009, geez, that's a shame. But in my Peterbilt, my blue Peterbilt, it was just a check engine light. I had to buy Cummins Insight and all that. So we're going to talk about that more as we go, just to stay competitive, because that truck was it was a tough truck to start out in, I'll tell you, and that's part of what I'm warning a lot of in this chapter. And not to say that everybody will get the same results or have the same issues, but in my experience, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations along the way. And yeah, there's a lot of similarity in these stories. I go on to say here, some people love to always be on the road, and I do too, right? To a large extent, I'll always be a truck driver. Well, I'll always be a trucker, but yeah, trucker. But I would love, but I would not have the balanced lifestyle that I have now if I was out chasing 100,000 miles a year with, this big loan note to pay back, and especially an unreliable truck that I'm just getting or don't know how well it's working. That's how we can easily get trapped in 2 to 5 years of just running on the treadmill. So, especially because once I pay the loan off, that emission truck will pretty much it'll be needing a rebuild on the motor. It'll be that emission system has took some type of beating on the life of that motor, and depending on who had it before, the driveline components you might already be needing some at that point. And these motors are looking at about 20K, or sometimes a little bit more to rebuild this motor. And and I guess, and I'm just saying here, I get stuck having to replace almost every element of that emission system, right? So that the motor rebuild is around that 15 to 20K mark. Then we start to get into like having to replace the emission system parts, which we could be looking at another 10K between filters, valve, and EGR cooler. And that's if you don't have DEF. Then we're looking at another 5K on top of that probably. So you're looking at another, 15K. And it's just like, man, I just paid off this loan just to be right back dumping all this money back into it. I was like, shh. It makes that $10,000 pre-emission truck look more and more attractive every time. We'll just put some of that money into making the truck more comfortable and more livable. Put a Tempur-Pedic mattress in it. Hook up get a new tri-pack APU if you want, or make a homemade APU and put a rooftop AC in there. Start camping it out like a RV, refrigerator in there and stuff. But anyways, and that's compared to about 7K. I can rebuild my N14 for about 7 to 10K for liners, pistons, counterbore cut if I need to, and main and rod bearings. Like a simple overhaul, I could probably get done for right around 7K. Now, if I want to get into putting heads and injectors, it'll be a little more north of that. Of course, it'll be about more so like 12 or 13. But I know when I'm up against my next rebuild, I'm just needing liners, pistons, and bearings. Cause I put bearings in at 800,000, I put cylinder heads in around $1 million, and injectors in around $1 million. So and I got PX injectors. So I'm just gonna do liners, pistons, measure my liners, and if they measure good, I'm not gonna cut them. I'm just gonna keep it original block. And they measured well about 300,000 miles ago when I took the heads off. And really, I replaced the heads, and I didn't even need to replace my heads because I had a feel getting into my oil, and I was thinking, maybe it was one of my injectors. So my injectors were fine, but I put all new 6 injectors and PX injectors and cylinder heads at the same time. Yeah. I don't know exactly what convinced me to do all that. It was about 5 years ago. But I was according to all my research at the time, I was like, the two places where the fuel can leak is in the injectors or the cylinder heads. And we worked out a deal for injectors and cylinder heads up there. I was in Billings, Montana, at the Cummins dealership, and it was about a week, and I liked the guy who was doing the work. I felt confident in his ability. And so we did that. Then I go to Washington. I think like Spokane. Yeah, it was a big deadhead to go get that load at that time. And I go to check my oil, and I still got fuel in it. And you know what? It was my fuel pump the whole time. Very rarely there's a seal because the fuel pump hooks up to the what is that? The air compressor right there on the N14, and they share like this little area of oil, but sometimes very rarely the oil seal will fail. So replace that fuel pump. It was only 4 bolts, and at that time I had a guy at TA in Missoula, Montana, help me do that, and he was cool because he was running the shop in Missoula, Montana, TA, but he used to be an owner operator and stuff. He's like, man, yeah, I'm familiar with M14, because really some TA Petros might have been spooked out by doing a fuel pump, but on the N14 it was just 4 bolts and 2 hoses. Like really now I can definitely do it myself because I've changed my own air compressor on it. So the fuel pump is just the extension to that, but it's just like a little spider piece in there. It's real simple, but yeah, we changed that fuel pump and that was that. So really I didn't even need to do my heads and injectors is what I'm getting at. So when I go to do my rebuild, maybe 1.5 million. I don't know. I'm in no rush to rebuild it because I put such low miles on my motor every year. And I'm still burning maybe half a gallon to a gallon of oil between 15,000 mile oil changes. At 1.2 and a half. So it's just some conversation with you right there. So that's why you definitely get more than the book with these videos. Because with these videos, you get the conversation of the book. And then I get to reword the book the way that I would actually, present it and present it and converse and conversate with. Because this book is really like on some boot camp style stuff. So this is why many guys trade in. They trade their emission trucks back in, and get another new one. You'll hear this a lot from the crowd, where it's like, hey, which is okay if that's their strategy. But sometimes what I notice is that a lot of people in this crowd, they present this as if it's the only option to run a trucking company this way, which is that once their emission trucks start like really going down into the pits, they just trade it in and get another one. And I say here, that's cool, but now they're right back in the hole with the bank loan, and now they are pretty much forced to get right back on the road to pay for it all. Unless these guys are really killing it and doing well over 3K net, simple net per week, and they never get to stop much. Because even then, it really needs to be making. You need to really be making more like 5K and stuff like that to I don't know, to justify, at least to do it over and over again. Maybe on your first truck, I get it. Go out there and hustle, get your money, do what you work, whatever operation. Stay out however long you need to stay out. But to just keep doing it over and over again, just to get newer trucks, when we could just, if we want to spend money like that, we could just get it. I'm not trying to tell you. That's what I'm trying to do with this chapter. I'm just trying to present a lot of options. But, I mean, they never get to stop much, right? And they have to be over the road to continue to make payments and still profit. So here in the green, we say what? Here's food for thought. I drove something like 44,000 miles last year at the time of this at writing, and still increased my net worth by about 30% or so. And this was during 2020, right? Yeah, so I did this mostly by keeping my overhead at home low, except for, I just started a whole bunch of new business stuff recently, so, but it's all good. Making my business overhead low, and by making great deals. Made a ton of great deals. Gotta make the great deals, right? And I do really enjoy being home. But I had some itchings inside of me and some passions I needed to do. And part of it is like getting this information out and writing this book. I've invested quite a lot of time and money, But that's what we do. Just like what we're doing now. It's all real. We put the time in and we get out what we put into it. So why would I trade that freedom for a newer and more problematic truck? Now, not to get too personal with what I'm saying here, but like back into the trucking side of it for sure is like, this is what it is. The freedom, that's what I'm about to. I consider freedom success too, right? So it's just something to weigh in personally, it's the decision's all yours, of course, but I'm going to continue to give you more information of why I'm so stubborn with my opinion and stuff. But like I said, I'm not here to judge. And there's definitely more than one way to do it. But here comes the statement right here, right? There comes a time when you'll have to decide for yourself. How much money is enough for you? Like how much until you're like, okay, I'm cool. 100,000 in the bank, 50,000 in the bank, 30,000 in the bank. When can you be like, okay, cool, I'm going to like do what really makes me happy now? And if trucking is what really makes you happy, then hey, cool, then double up. And I mean like really like you're passionate, like pretty much every morning you wake up and you can't wait to power up your motor and get going. Now here's a little key thing to know too, right? If you're not knowing how much money makes you happy, then there's a higher chance of what? Just always being on the road trying to make more of it, not realizing that maybe you've entered into this rat race where it's like, hey, Can you remember like why you got into trucking? Like what was the things that like you were looking forward to in life, or do you have any like ideas or different businesses, or do you want to expand your fleet maybe, or are you cool with just going with the flow? And that's cool too. To each his own, right? But as long as it's like not stressing you out, because I've seen a lot of owner operators over the years. They really like, they say they love truck driving, but I can see it in their face that they're tired, they're stressed out, and maybe I'm just overanalyzing. But a lot of times, I think guys get stuck into this rat race and don't realize it, that we don't enjoy the freedom that might have attracted us into trucking in the first place. So, I'll continue. But if you have discipline with your money, learn to do, more things on your own, and create a lower overhead operation. It's pretty crazy, but you can keep just as much money or more money than the guys with the new trucks, or people with the new trucks that are driving 100,000 miles a year, but do so with half the work. It's all operation styles. So let me tell you another big thing to consider when deciding on what age of a truck to get. Another big thing to consider is what? The cost of parts. Let me double check, make sure I'm still recording. Okay, 26 minutes. I'm not going to speed read, but we're going to pick up the pace a little bit here. So the cost of parts. Parts on the older trucks for the most part are way more cheaper, right? Very incorrect English right there. Especially for the engine parts. Let me give you a few examples. A couple years ago, my friend, he lost his turbo, and this is inside of a 2012 with a Cummins ISX, the 2350 model, a 2012. Key number, we're looking at the years right now. So 2012 Cummins. This turbo cost him right around $6,000 part alone, plus labor. Now, the turbo on my M14, which is a 2000 year model motor, well, 1999 model motor, costs anywhere from $750 if it's from a third party, like this place called Midland Supply. I think Midland Turbo. They sell it at my parts house here, and I've talked to the people, the manufacturer, and they've convinced me that their $750 turbo is just as good as the Cummins one, if not better. But the Cummins one is $1,500. And I can install it myself if I need to. Basically, it's take a couple of the intake pipes off, then it's literally like 4 bolts that go into an exhaust manifold. And I think I might have a coolant line to it. I'd have to maybe drain my coolant too. And I don't need a computer to recalibrate it. So that's just a pretty extreme example of price difference. $6,000 for this turbo that comes with this 2012 truck. Still needs to be hooked up with the computer and calibrated, and probably another $1,000 in labor, give or take. Yeah, and there's another like $1,500 actuator that sits on top of that turbo, and sometimes those are seized up and fail too, and that's another part of on top of a part. Another example, the air compressor on my N14 is around $700, $900, give or take, compared to the upwards of like $1,500 or $2,000, give or take, on my 2009 on my early model Cummins ISX, the 871. The 871 was the second ISX model. The first one was the 870 from the year 2004 to 2007. So 2008, and we're going to talk about that more here as we in emissions. But 2008, right, is when they first started DPF and DOC. So 2004 to 2007, those are decent trucks. That's when the emissions first started. A lot of guys just easily unplug, the EGR valve sometimes on those trucks. But right around 2008 is when the computers got more difficult to fool, and people actually started like really having to program deletes in order to circumvent, those regulations. But as we mentioned above, about what the pros and cons of deletes are. And yeah, so we can do this for almost every part of the motor: the oil pump, the fuel pump, the head, the cylinders, the pistons, etc. When I compare the cost of parts against newer motors, I see consistently probably about 50% less in cost compared to the same part on a newer truck. Page 28. let's look at a motor rebuild. And yeah, so I just mentioned this up. So we're about to get into the motors. All right. So this is an important time, to take down some notes. But this is, we're talking about the motors now. Let's look at a motor rebuild. I can do a very decent motor rebuild on my N14 for about $7,500 to $12,500. This compared to the well over $20,000 I spent rebuilding my 871 ISX. I imagine rebuilding a 2012 and newer motor will be at least the same, if not more, than the cost of my 871 ISX, which was $20K. Especially when you get into cutting the counterbores for liners, and injectors, and etc. So basically, cut and dry. If I was out buying a truck right now, there are two motors that I would be looking for the most, which would be a Cummins N14, 435 horsepower. In pretty much, I'd be looking for this motor inside of any truck, 2003 or older, 2003 or predated. Next would be a Detroit 60, 12.7. Same deal. Dated 2003 or 2003 or predated. Now some runner-ups would be at the same time frame. Cat had his 3406B, also known as the 6NZ. That's the serial number they start with. The motors have this 6NZ serial number. That's a cool motor. It came out at the same time as these three. We'll talk about it as we keep continuing. Not so great on fuel mileage, but one heck of a motor. This motor gets used a lot in heavy haul. We got the Cummins big cam. This is all mechanical motor, no ECM. Parts are super cheap on that motor. Doesn't get much for fuel mileage though. Then we got the original ISX, which is the ISX 870. This is from 2004 to 2007. Now maybe on the newer ones we got this Cummins X15, the fuel efficiency series. Then actually, also don't sleep on this one. This Volvo D12. This is the pre-emission Volvo motor. This came out at the same time as the N14, the Detroit 60. Now, Volvos were putting all four of these motors in their truck. That's one reason why I suggest that Generation 1 Volvo. They're just built like a tank. But, they were put with these N14 Cummins. Detroit 60 12.7s. They even had some, you'll see some of the Generation 1 Volvos with 3406 cats in it. And also they had the Volvo D12. Now, a lot of people have great stories about the bulletproof nature of this D12. Even one guy, I was reading his story, it was like 1.7 million, still never rebuilt, still never put more new liners and pistons, and I think he put new bearings in there, but it was a really super cost-effective motor for him to have. He just put new oil and filters on it, gave it diesel, and just gave it some love along the way. Still going with it. So let's talk about this N14. We're going to talk about each one in detail, all right? So you can make your best choice. I'm not going to tell you exactly which one to get because you got to choose in yourself, because each motor has a pro and a con, and I don't want to tell you to get a motor and you just blindly go with the motor I tell you, and for some reason you're not able to squeeze your hopes and dreams out of it. You know what I mean? So I'm just going to give you as much as I know about each motor, so you can roll with which option seems to fit you the best. So that way, if you come up with some resistance, which we're all faced with certain degrees of resistance, that you're more satisfied in your choice to choose. That you didn't just that you chose as a man or you chose as a woman. The motor that you did, and also to stick with it, right? So, since I'm having the most experience with this Cummins N14 now, I am. I'll start with it, which is boom. I really like this motor. I own a 1999 model, manufacture date N14, and this is the motor that I take all around the country. It is a very straightforward design, and I think pretty much it has everything it needs, and really nothing else in the way when it comes to like mechanical and working on it. People have made a lot of money with this motor, right? When those truck drivers back in the day were making all that money, and they were doing it in these pre-emission motors, I would always ask them, the old school drivers, the guys who made a killing like early on, and this was really in like the 90s, the late 80s, the 90s, and maybe the early 2000s still, and they were doing it when things were much simpler in these pre-emission motors. A lot of us, like my age, like I'm 31 now, I came in at 20 and 21, these pre-emission motors were already here. And so when I got my first truck in 2009, I didn't think anything of it. I just got it because I thought it was the low mileage, 400,000 or 500,000 miles, and I thought I was doing well. Didn't even know what motor I had. But eventually I had to start talking to the older cats at the time, and I was like, man, what was it like? What were you guys doing different? And a lot of it was they were owning these motors. So I always told myself I'd get one, and I did. Right? And I say right here, the M14 was one of these motors. And yeah, so early on in trucking, I was so immersed in figuring everything out in the trucking business. I remember talking to the older owner operators, and these three motors always popped up: the N14, the Detroit 60, and the Cat 6NZ. Even though I already had a 2009 Pete with an ISX, I would always tell myself that whenever I got the opportunity to buy one of these motors, I will. And that's what I did. See, I just said this. See, I should just read. My intuition was correct. These motors are built to go well past 1 million miles. They're built to go the distance, especially when they're driven easily and they're maintained. As long as we don't really dog these motors out, they kind of last forever. If the truck is in great shape, if the truck is in decent shape, and if the motor sounds good, I wouldn't hesitate to buy a nice N14 with 800,000 miles on it and put it straight to work. Like I said earlier, I burn about 1 gallon of oil between my 15,000 mile oil changes. At the time of this writing, I'm at 1.1 million miles. Now, more so like 1.2 and a half or so, with no rebuild. In the maintenance chapter, I'll describe what all is involved in the rebuild, just so you know, because that was another thing I had to figure out that nobody could really explain to me too well, like what all is involved in a motor rebuild. When somebody says, oh, I got to in-frame my motor or out of frame or rebuild, well, we'll talk about what that means too, if you're not already knowing. So, but yeah, this is a great motor. Almost every part on it is something that we can do ourselves with basic hand tools. And to rebuild this motor for pistons, cylinders, and bearings is, like I said, right around 7,500 to 12 and a half or so. Some cons of this motor are really none compared to the cons of other motors. But over the years, the rebuild quality of the injectors has seemed to have gone down. They've been rebuilding these cores over and over, that the reman injectors can be hit or miss. That's been kind of one of the kryptonites to these M14 motors, is that the injectors sometimes have been hit or miss. And so I guess that Cummins just doesn't want to make new injectors anymore for this motor, and they ought to keep it going, because a lot of farmers still use this motor. People should have the choice if they want to run their motor. I know Cummins should be able to have the choice too to not want to make the injector anymore. But it's like, still though, like people still own these motors, and it's like, you know what I mean? Like you're the manufacturer of it. Then put the designs out for people. Then if you're not gonna make them new anymore, then please put the designs out for other people can manufacture them new, or something, right? You would think that Cummins would want to continue its its service to be able to service its own products, regardless if it was made in the 90s or not. It's still a staple product that made Cummins who they are today. But there are some third-party companies that maybe do make the new injectors. I'm not sure. I see them in the back of the magazine sometimes, and I've been given business cards for some, but I've never really followed through with any of them, because the PX injectors are of a better rebuild quality. And like I said right here, some people say that it's all a conspiracy to get people that have kept their trucks forever to submit to buying a new truck. And maybe so, right? But I got a workaround for this. If you buy an N14 and need injectors, just make sure to buy the PX injectors. The PX, these are the letters, like RX stands for like reman, and like PX stands for I don't know, but it's like it's a higher rebuild quality. They rebuild more components and with higher quality parts. And you'll know it's PX because when you see the part number, it'll say like either RX XYZ5234, or it'll be like PX 1234567, and those are the PX injectors. RX is a remanufactured injector, but the PX is a rebuild too, but of higher quality, and they use higher quality rebuild components, right? They cost a little bit more, but come with a longer warranty, usually of 2 years instead of 1. But many times, if you're not specifically requesting PX injectors, they will usually try to sell you on RX injectors. People are getting those hit and miss problems with the RX injectors. More so. So when you look at the box, like I said, just look at the part number on it, and it will start with PX and then the part number. These are PX injectors. Plus, there's a tons of videos on YouTube for how to fix these motors. All right, and that's straight up. So then we get this resource called Cummins Quick Serve. Cummins Quick Serve can be a great resource for all Cummins motors when it comes to having access to step-by-step procedures, wire diagrams, and etc. So don't be intimidated. You can also go over to my Andrew's Method YouTube page, and I've posted repair videos on my channel just as I do them over the years. I got videos on adjusting, doing overhead adjustment, adjusting my valves, air compressor install, starter, piston cooling nozzles, oil pan install, and some other ones. This is a very straightforward motor with only a few sensors and no emission system choking it down and making the oil dirty. In my opinion, this is what it's all about: minimizing risk and increasing efficiency. A pre-emission motor really helps do this in many ways. Many people have loved this N14 motor. So, please keep this motor in mind as you proceed in your truck buying. Oh, and one more negative about this truck: if you're buying this truck and you see an oil leak, if you're buying this motor and you see an oil leak on the driver's side, in one of those 3 rectangles that's underneath the air compressor and the ECM, you'll see the ECM, air compressor, and then underneath it, there's these 3 rectangles. Those are like the rocker box, or it's for like the cam down there, and the but those are leaking. Those can be a little tricky too to replace. But as long as you're finding somebody who knows the N14 well, they'll know that, like, to measure off the old gaskets, because sometimes the gaskets are in different sizes depending on how it had to get shimmed. But yeah, so that's a little something to keep in mind right there. If you're inspecting when you see a leak down there, I would knock off about $2,000 from the price, because that's about probably $1,500 to $2,000 job, because the air compressor, what is it down there? The oil pump ends up having to come off, which is a nice time to go ahead and put an engine position sensor in EPS, because it's right there behind the oil pump. But yeah, that'll have to come off if the front one needs to get changed for gaskets. So, Detroit 60 Series 12.7. The Detroit 60 Series is another great pre-emission motor. Many people swear by this motor and love it. This motor may even be cheaper to rebuild than the N14. I've never owned one personally, but from my research, the average cost to rebuild this motor is around $6,000 to about $12,000 for basic piston, cylinders, and rod and main bearings. And what are the rod and main bearings? Those are the bearings that connect the crankshaft. Yeah, the crankshaft to the piston. Crank the piston. And so the bearings are like what protects the rubbing, of course, with the oil. So the bearings is what helps hold it all together. Crank, piston, bearings. Many people have told me over the years that this is a very user-friendly motor to work on yourself, especially when it comes to like doing injectors and stuff. I've even heard of older owner-operators telling me how they used to rebuild this motor over the weekend by themselves in their own front yard or in their own little shop for like $4,000. Think about that. For $4,000, a man was able to rebuild his own motor to last another 1,000,000 miles, right? $4,000 for the parts. Probably new bearings and new pistons and cylinders. Yeah, and it just was able to squeeze them in over the weekend, huh? So that's pretty incredible, right? Now, of course, if we're not doing the labor ourselves, it's going to cost more than $4,000, but $4,000 for pistons, cylinders, main, and rod bearings is perfect news for the owner-operator. Like I said, I've never owned one of these motors, but it still remains on the top 2 of my list if I were to ever go again truck shopping, which I don't plan on. I plan on keeping my truck that I got, keep it forever. Just keep on, just keep it out here rocking. I treat it well. I drive it well. Drive it real well. The truck will go anywhere. There's resources like truckersreport.com where you can go into the search function and type in keywords like Detroit 60 or N14 or Cat 6NZ and just go read through everybody else's stories and experiences, right? That's what I would do in the beginning because that was one of my fastest ways to get information, and that allowed me to make a lot of informed decisions when it came to like doing maintenance myself or which motor I wanted to get eventually. So you can read about the pros and cons of other people's experience. I highly suggest doing this regardless of the motor that you choose. Research, my friend. There's a few flaws to every motor, pretty much. And so, to mention one of the Detroit 60 is what's called the bull gear. Bull gear. I've heard a few horror stories about the bull gear, but for the most part, it seems to never overshadow, the extreme performance and durability of this motor. The bull gear is something to keep in mind, though, and is something to ask the original owner or, the owner about when you go to buy your truck. Ask them if the bull gear has been changed already, or, and if so, make sure you see the receipt. If you can see the paperwork, you see that the bull gear itself is on the item list and the labor matches up. To do the bull gear, I don't know for sure, somewhere probably in this $2,000 to $3,500 range. If you catch it before it breaks loose. You see, that's the thing with this bull gear. The front end of the motor has to come off, the radiator usually has to come off, and etc. So if you could buy a Detroit 60 with a fresh rebuild or it has a new bull gear, that will be a great benefit. Something to keep an eye out for and look for. But don't be too concerned if it doesn't have a new bull gear. They seem to last almost forever, maybe 800 to 1.2 million miles or more. But it seems like when they go, and they take a lot down with it. The gear breaks, and it breaks the front end, and so it's just something to be aware of. But like I said, doesn't overshadow the fact that the Detroit 60 is a great motor. And if you're buying one of these motors, then, after you get a couple good, like 3 to 6 months in, and if it really concerns you, then maybe you could just do it preemptively, preventively do the bull gear ahead of time as an investment, so it's just something you won't be concerned with, especially if you take it to a group of guys, a shop that has great skill and they know what they're doing. And boom, 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 boom. Yeah, so there are Detroit motors too. I don't know. I think they're not called 60 series, or they might be still called 12.7s. But if they're made after 2004, they have an EGR, right? So the ones that are pre 2004 have no EGR, and they are pre-emission. So that's also just keep that in mind too. That's what all the motor manufacturers. 2004 is the first year they introduced the EGR valve. So pre-emission is 2003 and predated. Post-emission is 2004 and after. Whether it's in a Freightliner, a Peterbilt, a Volvo, or whatever, the International Eagle, it really kind of doesn't matter. This Detroit 12.7 60 series is another great engine that I would consider building my business around. All right, so you see at this point how we're focused on these motors. We buy the right motor, then we can pretty much put it in any truck, and we're going to do way well off than just buying a Peterbilt with any type of motor. So here's some runner-ups. We got this 3406 Cat 6NZ. It's another legend of a motor. The only reason it makes my runner-up list is because it has quite the reputation of lower fuel mileage. For most of my personal research and from talking to guys over the years, this motor sees about 4.5 to maybe upper 6 miles per gallon. But maybe if you really baby this motor, you can get 6 miles per gallon consistently. with lighter loads, not in the mountains and stuff. But the selling point of this motor is its ability to pull. Its reliability and the ease to wrench on this motor are self. This motor was competition and out at the same time as the N14 in the Detroit 60 series. I've never owned a Cat 6NZ, but if I were in the market for a newer truck and the N14 in Detroit just wasn't available in the markets and I just really had to make a move and I needed a truck ASAP, I would really consider this motor. There's a ton of old school guys out here that have made a killing off this motor and swear by it. Now, like out here where I live, there's a lot of grain hauling, and maybe when I get, like, I'm already like in semi-retirement mode from trucking. Like, I don't tarp loads anymore and stuff, under 50,000 miles a year. But when I go into full retirement mode, possibly in the next 2 to 5 years, maybe, I might still keep like a farm plate and haul grain around and just keep my truck moving. But this is the type of motor that would be perfect for like hauling like a farm truck, like hauling grain, because it's just a beast. And that thing is easy to work on. You work on it on the field if you need to, and it's going to haul that heavy grain, that 100,000 pounds of grain or whatever. Like my N14, it'll haul it too, but it's going to give more of a fuss. It's going to be like, yo, I thought we were hauling 10,000 pound flatbed freight around. What are you doing? So, but a 3406, I might well get it like a little truck like this. Cause them farm, you really don't even. I don't even think you need a CDL to do farm. You just get some farm plates one time. Don't even have to do IRP or none of that stuff. Yep. No E-log and stuff. Just go out and go run a couple loads. Like, yeah, I'm gonna go make a couple hundred a day or whatever. Shoot, I might start doing that now. Nah, I still got my flatbed paid off for. Maybe I'll let somebody come pull my flatbed, man. Start a little fleet, like a Landstar fleet of owner-operators. Only thing is my insurance company wants 9 years. That's the only thing about OIDA. Like, OIDA is great for the solo owner-operator, but to build with OIDA, they want 9 years driving experience to hire somebody, and it's like, geez. So, if the N14 in Detroit was not in play, or I'd probably get the Volvo D12. I think that's what it's called, yeah, D12. Before I'd get this 3406. But like I said, I'd get this 3406 for a farm truck for sure. There's a ton of old school guys out here that have made a killing off this motor and swear by it. 3406 had an A model, 3406A, and a B model, 3406B. A lot of the Cat guys, they'll be able to tell you a lot more about this. And I think the main difference was, from what I've been able to tell, is that the B model had a computer that controls the injectors, like how the N14 has like a real basic entry level, like just straight to the point injection control. But many people like the B model better. I may be a bit wrong on this, or maybe it's 34, but 3406B is the one I hear more so that has the reputation. But the A, being a straight mechanical, I would see that probably a lot of guys would like the mechanical version better too, because there's no computer in the way, or potentially in the way. It's just straight mechanical. It just gets fuel, no computer, less variables. I just never really frequented the Cat motors, but I've always pretty much entertained the conversations over the years. But like I say right here, I have been semi-aggressive on collecting information on them over the years. So that's our 3406. That's our 3406 Cat. 3406B, which is also the 6NZ. And where does the 6NZ come from? The 6NZ comes from the serial code. Right? It comes from the serial code. It's the first three characters. Next on our list, we got Cummins Big Cam. This is mechanical motor, straight mechanical motor. This is the one that it comes right before the N14. This is a really cool motor that I would be interested in. This motor came out right before the N14 did. It's a completely mechanical. There's no ECM or computer controlling it at all. That means there's basically no sensors, and there's way less variables when it comes to what can shut you down. Basically, either your motor works or it doesn't. And this motor has a reputation for being a runner. Again, I've never owned this motor, but I've heard many stories from longtime owner ops who really love this motor and wish they never sold the one that they had owned. You'll hear that a lot when talking to older owner ops, especially if you have a pre-emission motor. They'll be checking out your motor, be like, man, I wish I never sold my old truck when I had that motor. See right here in the blue? Guys tell me all the time, that's a good motor you got there, my N14. I wish I never sold mine. Now I got this new emissions junk and all this, right? Yeah, I hear it a lot. I've heard it a lot over the years for sure. Seriously, but this is what I seriously though. I hear this often when I'm outside looking under my hood, topping off oil and etc. I'll tell you another cool thing about this big cam Cummins motor. Then I'll tell you the con of this motor is that from what I hear, at least, parts are very cheap. I don't know how true it is, but I was told once by an owner operator that injectors for the big cam are like $50 each. Maybe $100. I don't know. So, but that's pretty crazy, right? So for $300, you can get like 6 injectors, compared to about $500 or $600 per injector for mostly every other motor. So compared to about $3,600. Even in the M14, we're spending $600 per injector, especially for a PX. I never went and cross-checked him exactly, but he didn't seem to have a reason to lie. And, I'm sure the turbo, all that stuff is going to be way cheaper on that motor. It's just really straightforward parts. So if you find one of these motors and you're considering it, I would call your local parts store and check injector prices and stuff like that first. Don't be like, hey, that guy Andrew told me the injectors were $50 and then you buy a whole motor over that one statement, right? Can't do that. But just double check me on that one. Now, probably what I would say for the con of this motor would be the fuel mileage. And we're probably not going to see much more than 5 or 6 miles per gallon on this motor. But, because this motor is a dinosaur of the past, basically, right? So when fuel was cheap and fuel mileage didn't matter much. It just would go. These motors are usually khaki in color, but I have seen them in like a grayish blue also. So if you see that big khaki colored motor, looks like a military khaki, you're like, what is that? It's probably a big cam. Yeah, you're probably going to see this in like early model 90s, late 80 model trucks, maybe some mid model 90s, I guess. Now, we got the Cummins ISX 870 and the 871. Now, this is right after the N14. We start with the 870. These are 2 different motors. They are both called ISXs. Sometimes, you'll get this, somebody will tell you, oh, I got an ISX. Well, there's 4 different type of ISX. So these are the first 2 ISX. The ISX 870 came out in, I guess, around 2002. They came out a little early. No, it must have been closer to 2004. Maybe the first ones were coming out early in 2002. I must have put that for a reason, because I must have seen them come out a little bit earlier. But pretty much when emissions started, which is 2004. And the 871 was introduced right around 2008, when the next emission regulations got situated. Now, the ISX 870 replaced the N14, and it has less emission systems than the 871. The 870 only has an EGR valve. In comparison, the 870 has an EGR valve, an EGR cooler, after treatment injector, which is the dozer valve, the 7th injector. I almost forgot about that guy. That's another part of it, which squirts the diesel to burn the DOC and the DPF filter. So by buying a 2008, you automatically take on DPF, DOC, dozer injector, EGR cooler, and EGR valve. Yep. So a lot of people like the 870, even though most people thought the N14 was way better. Now, the 870 did fine for the most part, and probably saw a slight fuel mileage improvement over the N14. Now, parts on the 870 cost a bit more than the N14, and parts on the 871 cost way more than the N14 and a bit more than the 870. Incrementally more, right? I started off in my first truck with this 871 motor back in 2013. I had this 2009 Peterbilt 871. Come to think about it, that truck wasn't really even that old. 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13. It was only a 4-year-old truck with the 871 ISX. But man, I say, this motor almost broke me. I can't even lie. That's what I wrote. That's what I'm writing here. It did teach me a lot and got me prepared to enjoy more simple motor designs such as the 871. Oh, excuse me. I thought I wrote the M14, such as the M14. But it allowed me to enjoy more simple motor designs, though. The 871 can be a great field-efficient motor if it gets tuned or deleted, like I was mentioning earlier, with the correct tune, which is illegal. So I'm not going to suggest this. But many owners did. And when they got the right tune, the 871 actually ran amazing. The oil would stay yellow for about 5 to 8,000 miles. It was a mean, efficient machine then. But as I said, the parts in this motor were still very expensive. A turbo is like $3,000. A turbo actuator is another $1,000. DPF and DOC are $3,000, so on and so forth. So I say here, you have to be very proactive with this motor, the 871. If you're going to run it with the emission systems intact, you gotta stay ahead of it. If you have this motor, I recommend going to rawze.com, RAWZE, and making a membership there and watching Roz's YouTube channel. I have met Roz in person. He's a great guy. He taught me very much, game-changing stuff in my early years, directly and also indirectly from his literature and his postings, and he made a book as well in his rawze.com. So, I suggest being a member on this website, especially if you're owning this 871 and 870 ISX or the newer 2250, 2350, and probably even the X15, maybe even get some conversation too. But you can read other people's posts and learn from them and see what's going on and see what these guys are doing and how they're keeping their 871s running finely tuned and whatnot, right? And if you have an issue, you can post it up on there. It's a community of guys and people on there. They tend to help each other with like, hey, my air compressor's not working. What do you think it might not be? RB, etc. And as long as your post is decently, as long as it's respectful and respecting each other's time, and if you articulate yourself well, you'll more than likely get an answer back, especially if you show that you've done some research yourself and you're not just like looking for somebody to just like instantly fix all your problems. So Roz's whole website is basically revolves around the 871 because this is the motor that he has and the motor he figured out down to the T. He's got like a 40 video playlist of like rebuilding this whole motor, like changing everything, like down to the T. And I'll say here, if it wasn't for Roz, I probably would have been for sure out of business early on. I wouldn't have been able to learn mechanics, problem solving in the business so quickly if it wasn't for him. So gratitude to Roz. So Roz has a video called EGR Tune-Up. If you have this motor, it's my opinion that you must do this EGR tune-up once a year, or at least once every 2 years, or maybe twice between 2 years, because this EGR tune-up gets all the soot out of what's called your venturi pipe and your differential pressure mixing tubes, right? And this is on the driver's side of your motor, and basically the venturi pipe is the pipe that comes off your exhaust, intake that goes to your EGR valve, and the differential pressure mixing tubes are the little tubes that goes to your pressure sensor, differential pressure sensor that measures what's going on with the pressure system. So it's just a matter of taking these pieces off to clean all the soot out so it can breathe, so the sensors aren't covered in soot, so it can know what's going on. Just as simple as, because that's the beginning of the emission system. Basically it starts there. So if it's not feeling and sensing well at that point, it could throw everything off, the way your turbo runs, the way your dozer injector sprays, and how everything gets burned in the DPF and DOC, right? It's called EGR tune-up, and this is the first repair / maintenance job that I decided to take on myself. And by doing this, it actually really, I can attribute that was my first spark that gave me confidence, the confidence boost I needed to do bigger jobs and more repairs and start carrying tools. If one of those 5 or so sensors that run the emission system is carbon packed, like packed with soot, it won't be able to sense correctly, right? Which therefore gives inaccurate data to the computer, which in turn makes the turbo do funny things to overcompensate or undercompensate, and or the DPF doesn't passive regen going up and down the road like it's designed to do. So if you're not hip to this knowledge, there's a great chance that the dealerships will just like, you know, the old expression right here, eat the lunch, so to speak. Eat the lunch, so to speak, because it's like, hey, your turbo's bad, or hey, your DPF needs to be cleaned, or hey, your DOC is cracked or something. But that's why this EGR tune-up is crucial. We see less and less of that when we make sure that the system is able to breathe and able to do its job, which is sensing what's going on with that system. So we just replace these sensors. It's all in the EGR tune-up. I think I might talk about it more here coming up in maintenance or something. But Roz on YouTube, EGR tune-up, you'll see it. It's like a few sensors and a few pipes that need to come off and get cleaned. But it's always well worth it. So when they plug their computer up, it might say bad turbo, or replace EGR cooler, DPF plugged, or etc. And so maybe if you don't know better, you might agree to buy a turbo or an EGR cooler. And if it's EGR cooler, make sure that you get them to show you the pressure test where it's leaking in the water. Not just like, especially if you're at a dealership out of town and you don't know these folks. You're like, hey, I need to see this EGR cooler fail the pressure test. Or maybe a new DPF that you didn't even need. Right? Keyword, didn't even need. So like I just said, if these sensors aren't reading right because they are packed with soot, all sorts of weird things in engine codes can happen. I remember one time I was in Michigan in the Detroit, greater Detroit area. I get a check engine light, and at that time I didn't have the Cummins Insight software and hookups, so I stopped at Peterbilt or at Cummins, I forget, to get the code read. Because, it was just yellow check engine light on the Peterbilt. It was so not user-friendly. And they plug up to see what the code is. And mind you, I just dealt with some pretty big repairs right before this. I think I had like maybe $5,000 to my name in the bank. Probably about 23 years old still at this time, 24 years old. And the man now says I need an EGR cooler and that it's going to be a $5,000 job for some reason. Right? Because EGR cooler is really nice. It shouldn't be that expensive. By the time they get the parts and do everything they need to do. I was like, okay, nah. I got to figure something out. Luckily, I had Roz's personal telephone number, and I gave him a call. And, he's a tough guy. He was like, have you changed your oil, exhaust, back pressure sensor? I'll say that again. Exhaust, back pressure sensor. It's on the exhaust side of the motor. And on the ISX, it's on top of where, like thermostat is and towards the top of the motor. And I said, no, I have not. Then he tells me that, the sensor goes bad around 500 to 600,000 miles. I was like, sheesh, well, that's like the type of mileage that I have on my odometer right now. He tells me, go buy the sensor and change it out and call him back. He didn't ask me, did I have the parts or did I know how to do it? He's like, go get the sensor and change it and call him back. And really, I barely even knew where it was. So I go back in and buy the exhaust back pressure sensor. It's $150, give or take, if I remember right. So and at this time, I'm really not carrying any tools. I was just out there winging it. But I was soon discovering that if I wanted to be successful in my business, that I was going to need to do what? Collect and carry as many tools I needed and learn how to use them. And just know how the stuff on my truck and motor and works, right? All I needed to do this repair was a deep socket, like a flathead to undo the wire harness and just a socket to undo the socket, but I didn't even have that. So that's pretty sad. Don't be me back then. At least have some deep sockets and some socket sets and some wrenches and stuff. Yeah, my tool list. I show like give some ideas on my tool list. But lucky for me, my enthusiasm was young and perking over. We must have won over one of the mechanics enough for him to step outside, and he was like, man, I'll get it. He popped the old sensor off for me, put the new one in, and it was embarrassing. And one of the moments I realized I need to be doing better and taking more initiative and having tools. I had to go, get this man to come all the way out just to put to use a deep socket sensor. So yeah, that was like, I guess, it's like man card or something at that time. And I was like, you know what? Okay, I see what's going on. I need to get some tools. Long story short, when I keyed on my ignition, check engine light was already off. Not only was it off, it stayed off for like the next couple months, which gave me plenty of time to, stack and save more money and get into a more secure financial position. I called Roz back, thanked him so much, and it wouldn't be the last time either. Roz got me out of a couple pinches early on for sure. I highly suggest, in addition to this book, that you find a great mentor in this business. Somebody who's actually out here doing it, and has been doing it longer for you. Bonus points if they have their own authority. But somebody who seems successful in your eyes. They have a lifestyle that you like. They have a type of truck that you like, or you like the way this man or woman, operates within their family structure, or like their schedule, their lifestyle. And, if you could have this person as someone that you can call from time to time and talk to on the phone, or just be around this person, or offer them some help, or whatever it is, that's going to really speed up your learning process to be, it's power and proximity to be close to people who are already doing it, right? So my suggestion here is just make sure that y'all get along first, and if it's organic, just ask him or her for their number, and say you will not ask them for money. And that's the main thing that I think a lot of truck drivers got stingy over the years with the information and stuff, because we get to making money and we feel like that people are going to like ask us for money. Because let's face it, a lot of us owner operators, because of this lack of information or the lack of application of information, a lot of us get into this like being one or two breakdowns away from being out of business, and then we can end up being a liability to each other, and we don't want to be a liability to each other. That's one thing as a man or a woman. That's one of the most important lessons out of my book. And out of this, what I'm doing here is to never do your best, never to be a burden to somebody, right? So that's why I say this in a joking way, but seriously though, just let them know you're not going to ask for any money. Tell them it would be great to get advice and to have someone to call if things get out of your experience level, and that you might need help figuring something out. And usually successful people love to help those who are doing for themselves and have potential, right? So don't be too prideful to ask for help. It took me many years to discover that asking for help or receiving some help is okay. It's called utilizing your resources. Now, of course, exploiting resources is a negative quality of character, but going along with some help from time to time, that's okay. It's utilizing resources. Somebody wants to make sure that you get through it, we got to get better at not saying no. My story I just told is an example and something to keep in mind when it comes to the emission system and how it can be a financial disaster. That's a little dramatic to say, but seriously, if you're not ready and not prepared for it. So I highly suggest going to Roz's website and downloading his book. He's really adamant about keeping his book free. So it's really like you go through Roz's boot camp. He's got a lot of really key fundamentals. He keeps a lot of numbers. Especially when it comes to like maintenance, and he's got a really great chapter on like how the emission system works, how the EGR system works. He's got a really great understanding of tires. So he makes some great analogies to help better understand the function of this system, so you can better understand how important it is to stay ahead of it and to do preventive maintenance. The whole book is great and helped me tremendously to get going in the right direction. A lot of the things I still do today is from knowledge, experience, and tactics that I picked up in his book. But my honest opinion, if I were to do it again, I would not get another 871. The parts are just too expensive. There's too much unreliable emission components. And I never really did enjoy working on the motor myself. It just seemed like there wasn't enough free space to reach parts, or I always had to take too many other parts off to reach the parts I was working on. It was just too many little tight places and too many sensors. That's my opinion on the 871. But this is also my opinion from experience. This can be a great motor. You just got to be really involved in making it one, in keeping it one. I don't have as much negative to say about the 870, and everyone seemed to be much more happy with the 870 compared to the 871. All right, I'm going to go refill my coffee cup. I'll be right back.